There we go. All right, well, let's get started. I'm Jamie Van Leeuwen, and I'm with Fathom, and we're delighted to be here today. And we're going to have a very engaging conversation and presentation around AI and kind of what some of the solutions look like for a world with AI as we all transition into that space. And so a lot is going on, and we're super excited to have the opportunity to be on stage to have this conversation today. And so before we jump into what is some really important dialogue here, what I want to do is just introduce each of us, and so I'll start with myself. I am Jamie Van Leeuwen. I'm the Chief of Philanthropic Partnerships at Fathom. Super excited to be at Moz Festival. This is my first Moz Fest to be here. And before I was at Fathom, I worked with both Mayor and Governor Hickenlooper as his senior advisor, and then I ran a research institute in East Africa called the Global Livingston Institute, and worked with Laureen Powell-Jobs at Emerson Collective with her youth and community engagement work. And so super excited to be part of some of the conversations that are happening as it relates to Fathom. And so on that note, I'm going to turn it over to two amazing women who are going to be here with us today to talk a little bit about the work that they're doing and do their own introductions.
Yes, of course. Thank you, Jamie. So my name is Lucia. I'm the Director of Policy Innovation at Fathom. So my job is to do research, talk to stakeholders, to identify what sectors are in urgent need of AI governance. It's also my first MozFest, so I'm very excited to be here and just learn about all the interesting work people are doing in the responsible tech space. And prior to that, I was at Columbia University doing research in public trust and technology. And before that, my background is in human rights advocacy at Amnesty International and in journalism at the Financial Times. And yeah, and I can turn it over to Sherry.
Hi, everyone. My name is Sherry Hakimi, and I'm the co-founder and CEO of Perth.org. My background is in foreign policy with a focus on Iran and gender policy. And I co-founded Perth.org almost 3 years ago now as a means to be able to help people who are facing any sort of online threat or harm stay safe.
Great, and you'll be hearing much more from both of these ladies as we go through. My job is to kind of just to set the stage for what we're going to be talking about today. And so I'm going to begin with just a little overview of what Fathom is and a little bit of the AI landscape, how Fathom kind of got to the place that we're at right now. And then I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Lucia, who's going to talk a little bit more about one of the solutions that we're working on in the governance space. And then we'll move over to Sherry, who will talk a little bit about some of the impacts and the effects that we're seeing with AI and why this conversation is so important that we're having today. And then we'll open it up for any conversation that the audience wants to have in terms of questions and comments. And so the vibe at MozFest is so unique in the sense that we can have a really meaningful conversation. So we're going to really encourage you all to jump in as we go through today. And my hope is that one of the things that I'm really excited about being at MozFest for is my guess is that by the end of this weekend, the deck that we have here and the presentation that we're doing would look differently because of the conversations we're going to be having with the folks who we encounter over the course of the next couple of days. So thank you for being here. And really quick around the Fathom space, just in terms of who we are. Fathom is just under 2 years new right now. We're a nonprofit, and we're all about finding, building, and scaling solutions to help society navigate a world with AI. Everybody here at MozFest is figuring out how to navigate a world with AI, and so we're excited to be doing that together with you all. And I talk about the fact that if you want to be a better chess player, you should go play chess with people who are better than you. And as I got here yesterday, that will be no problem for me. I'm around people who understand the issues and the dialogue so much better, and I think there's so much that we can learn from each other in the work that's happening. And so I'm going to talk just a little bit about the AI landscape and how Fathom kind of got to where it is right now. As we looked at what it meant to go find and build and scale those solutions, we started off by doing a lot of focus grouping and polling. We polled academics and public officials and private sector folks, and we really wanted to understand what the issues were I founded a research institute in East Africa called the Global Livingston Institute, and the whole press around the work that we do, the whole frame was to listen and think before you act. That you don't just show up and start doing things, you need to understand what the issues are. And Fathom kind of took that same approach of listening and thinking and really understanding what it meant to, what it means for us to be in this new world. And as we did that, we learned a little bit along the way that's really informed some of the solutions that Lucia will talk about in just a couple of minutes here. And some of the polling and the focus grouping that we did tells us things that we all know. There's nothing that will surprise anybody here that AI use is growing significantly every year. We know that more and more people are using it. And as they told us that, we wanted to understand, well, how are they using it? And what we found is that they're using it a lot in their personal lives, that they're using it for voice assistance and health and medical information and articles and books and fitness planning. We know that folks are using it mostly for searches right now, that people aren't diving that deep, and that we've probably just scratched the surface of what AI means to society. We also know that people are really excited about AI, but they're also concerned, and that was reflected in a lot of the polling and the research that we collected. That about a third or over a third said, yeah, I'm excited about what's happening here, and about the same amount said, well, I'm a little bit worried about what's happening here. And that's not at all surprising to any of us who are working in that space, that the top benefits when people say, what are you excited about? You're excited about the medical possibilities, the healthcare opportunities, the travel opportunities. And what are we worried about? Things that are not surprising to us. We're worried about connectivity with friends and families. We're worried about the impact that it could have on our children. We're worried about the impact that it's having on the job market. And so that started to kind of gel in terms of what we're seeing. And the other thing I want to really reinforce is that of this polling and focus grouping we did, these were consistent across all of the sectors that we were polling across. It was also consistent across Republican, Democrat. Obviously, the work that we started off is very U.S.-centric in terms of the polling that we did. And those concerns that we started to see evolve are kind of demonstrated out in the media. We see the headlines around job prospects. We see the headlines around harm to young people and the impact that this is happening on the workplace with companies. So it's not surprising that people have some concerns about what it means to bring AI into society. As we started to dig deeper, one of the issues that really came out is that across sectors and across constituencies, we know that people overwhelmingly are saying that there's got to be some sort of a guardrail. And this started to tap into some of the concerns and some of the issues that people were starting to flag, that people are worried about making sure that people are safe when they're online. People are worried about data privacy. You're going to hear a little bit about that today in Sherry's remarks in terms of what are folks thinking that we need to actually put into place to make sure that as we bring AI into society, that there's some governance around that and what that looks like. And then we dug a little bit deeper. And not only do people want guardrails, but they're very particular about what that looks like. And we know that when we talk to folks, people have said that those guardrails can't be created by government, that we don't think that government can do it, we don't trust that government can do it. And similarly, the data and the polling in our conversation said that big tech can't do it, that this isn't something that we trust big tech or government to do, that if we're going to create guardrails or we're going to create governance, that it's got to be some sort of an independent entity in which to do that. And so that gave Fathom quite a bit of a platform to start digging into some of those solutions. And so what we're going to do today is we want to give folks an example of one of the solutions that we're starting to hone in on based on all those conversations. Every year, last year we started convening a group of policy leaders and thought leaders in DC who were really interested in the governance issue at our Ashby workshops. And they helped us kind of really define that issue so we could start digging into what an independent verification organization could look like. And on that note, I'm going to let my colleague Lucia really dig into kind of what we're thinking about right now.
Yeah, sounds great. Yeah, thank you very much, Jamie. So I'm going to be talking about some of these governance solutions that Fathom got to after like a year of talking to people, stakeholders, doing research. So building on what Jamie said, the situation we're facing is that people overwhelmingly want guardrails for AI, but they don't trust or they reject the traditional approaches of either industry self-regulation or government regulation. But what we found in our polling is that people do trust the idea of independent experts, people that know AI very well, being able to implement some of those guardrails. So one thing that we take pride in at Fathom is that we don't come with solutions, we co-create those solutions. So with the idea that people trust independent experts and following a year of conferences, focus groups, polling, etc., we arrived to a first policy solution, which is the idea of independent verification organizations. So what is an IVO? An IVO is a licensed third-party entity. So that would be an organization that is independent from both industry and government, that is made up of subject matter experts who are responsible for developing and updating standards for certifying whether an AI model is safe and accountable. So IVOs would operate within a government-authorized marketplace that is called the Independent Oversight Marketplace. A key feature of the IVO system is that the government would set the outcomes, and then these independent IVOs would determine how those outcomes are measured, so the kind of tests or requirements that the models would have to fulfill to be certified. Think of it as the FDA, the Food and Drug Authority in the US, decides that like drugs should be safe for people, but then it is the scientists that determine how that is tested in clinical trials. So each of these IVOs, these independent third-party entities, would be licensed by the government. What does that mean? That in order to have this license to be able to certify systems, they would have to prove to the government that they are independent, so they don't receive funding from industry, so there isn't a conflict of interest. And they would also have to prove that their certification actually leads to better outcomes. Another key feature of the IVO system is that companies would voluntarily pursue certification for their AI models. And you could ask yourselves, and as we said, like following up on what Jamie said, if the IVO concept looks different by the end of MOSFest, that would be a good sign, because we're interested in what other people think. But you could ask yourself, so then what is the incentive for companies to pursue voluntary certification? The idea is that by being certified, they would increase public trust in their models, in their products, so then that would give them a competitive advantage, meaning that trust and accountability would become a market asset for these companies and their models. So what we found when we socialized the idea of IVOs in polling, focus groups, is that they have strong public support. So of course people have questions, but overall they feel positive about the idea of third-party experts regulating or putting guardrails for AI. Sorry. Yes, and at Fathom we're working on the policy side as much as on the technical side of IVOs. But we recently completed a tabletop exercise, which is basically an activity to test and evaluate a response plan, focusing on a very important use case, which is the case of self-harm, and how AI systems have recently normalized self-harm and provided dangerous guidance to children and teens, as many of you would have seen in the news. And we found that in this particular case, for example, the idea of an IVO, so third-party subject matter expert, would allow for very rigorous testing, and most importantly, as the technology evolves, so would the assessments. So that wouldn't be like single prompts, it would be more comprehensive testing where the people at the IVO would recreate the kind of conversations where the self-harm tends to emerge. And also, this wouldn't be checkbox compliance where the AI company gets to say like, our model is safe. This would be based on performance and continuously updated. So yeah, that is one particular case in which we've tested the IVO structure, and we find that it could be successful. Of course, AI testing methodologies still have to advance, but we feel like this is, there is a promising future for the IVO governance solution. And I'd be happy to answer any more questions and start a conversation afterwards. So yeah. And now, Sherry, thank you so much.
Thank you. Morning, everybody. My name is Sherry Hakimi, and I'm the co-founder and CEO of Perth.org. And our focus at Perth is on online safety, and we serve everybody who is facing any sort of online threat or harm, including children, activists, academics, elected officials, journalists, really anybody who is facing any sort of threat or harm. But today, we're going to focus a little bit more on child safety. Am I missing something? There we go. So our goal is to democratize safety generally at scale. Online abuse is a global issue, so we need a global solution. And Perth.org is a Danish-American civil society organization and tech platform that is dedicated to tackling online abuse and advancing online safety. And our mission is to be able to provide people with the resources and support that they need to stay safe while advancing evidence-based solutions for online safety globally. The way that Perth works is, let's say you are facing some sort of threat or harm online. You go to Perth.org, you request an account, and you report what you're experiencing through our reporting form. When you hit submit on that report, our platform automatically generates a personal action plan for you that has resources and action steps that are tailored to your profile and the situation that you're facing, meaning that your location, your gender, your age, your profession, as well as the nature of the threat that you're facing, whether it's image-based abuse or cyberbullying or harassment or violent threats, and the motivation behind it, whether it's religion or human rights, personal relationships. There are tons of resources out there in the world that provide people who are facing threats and harm with support. But you have to know where to look. And when you're in that situation of being threatened, scared, bullied, whatever it might be, the last thing that you should be doing is hunting for resources. So we want to make that process easier and more supportive for people. On the back end, Perth.org reviews every report that we get. And because we are a trusted flagger with all the social media platforms, we can act as an advocate for our users. And we can quickly get things addressed. So if you've been doxxed or if you're getting threatened or there's any sort of online threat or harm, we can make sure that the platforms, at the very minimum, see the report and hopefully will take action in order to help you stay safe. And ultimately, our goal is to be able to not just cure or treat the symptoms of online violence, which is a global epidemic, but also to be able to cure the disease. And we do that through leveraging our unique data set, because we are intaking user-reported threats across all issue areas, across all of social media, all around the world. We are building a unique data set that we can then share with researchers and advocacy organizations, governments, and others so that we can analyze it and then formulate and advocate for evidence-based solutions. So that's a bit of background on Perth. So why are we concerned about AI? A few reasons. One, it's a force multiplier for online violence. It makes everything, threats and harms cheaper, faster, more believable, and easier to scale and personalize. It raises the stakes for platform design, regulation, and individual safety. And then ultimately, because it is so smart, because it is so fast, because it is going to move at a speed and scale that we don't have the ability as humans to be able to match step for step, we have to do a multi-pronged approach, everything, everywhere, all at once. Technical defense, policy changes, new norms in education for digital hygiene, and then robust support systems for people at risk or currently facing threats and harm. So, we need solutions like yesterday, but in the meantime, we know that we need these because the speed, the believability, the volume, the flood the zone approach, and the cross-platform proliferation and legal and detection gaps all combined are basically a perfect storm for threats and harm. It makes it really hard to contain. Deepfakes and voice clones persuade people and onlookers alike, affecting everybody in varying but still important ways. The flood of abuse is overwhelming for us as humans and for automated moderation systems. And then the content can easily be reproduced and altered in really minute ways that evade takedown on multiple platforms. And then ultimately, our policymakers and our systems and technologies all lag behind AI-powered capabilities, and then things like content provenance are still missing more often than not. Okay, so the way that AI enables online violence, specifically when we're looking at kids, we're just going to dig a little bit deeper in these sort of situations. One case might be impersonation. A child receives a voicemail from a cloned voice that sounds exactly like a classmate, a teacher, a parent, or a public figure, and tells them to do something that they probably shouldn't be doing, or is in that child's, it puts them at harm. It's not in their best interest. Another form of AI-enabled online abuse would be image-based sexual abuse. A child or teen's face is swapped into explicit videos and shared widely, and teens are often blackmailed with this sort of deepfake imagery. Mass harassment and smear campaigns are devastating for kids' self-esteem and for their reputation. And this can be easily done. It can be easily driven by AI bots that generate dozens or hundreds of targeted posts and comments that are tagging them. And kids live their lives online now, so it's almost like their world is ending. It makes it a lot easier to dox people. So you can just put into an AI model, search for that person, and you'll be able to glean small identifying details from various sources, public posts, public information, which can enable a perpetrator to easily target a child or a teen with really believable threats. The personal details that can be gleaned using AI are especially problematic. It can be medical conditions, a sport that child plays, an organization or student club that they're involved with. All of this enables perpetrators to be able to better not only threaten and harm, but make it really believable and really actually have the intended impact that they're looking for. And then lastly, hate amplification. AI, one of the benefits for humans is that it can enable us to communicate across languages. It makes translation a lot easier and faster, but there is a flip side to that. Now, any sort of online threat or harm can be translated into multiple languages extremely quickly, which allows it to not just spread within maybe your school, but across more communities and multiple platforms. There are solutions, though. It's not all doom and gloom. There are things that platforms, policymakers, and people can do. There are technical solutions like mandate provenance and content labeling. We can implement requirements for the metadata for synthetic media, which would make it easier to detect. We can strengthen identity and account controls, things like rate limits, tougher bot detection, verification for high-impact actions. We can create more friction, or when I say we, I mean the platforms can create more friction for harmful acts and content. Snap has actually introduced a really good example for how this can be done by a platform. For their content creators, they've actually implemented a system where if a piece of content is going viral and Snap gets that alert, they actually put the brakes on that content so that they can have a human review it and make sure that it doesn't violate their terms of service. Thereby ensuring that their content, at least by their content creators, is safe for public consumption. And that is not something that every platform is doing, and it would be nice if we had more controls in place like that. A few other things, demystifying the takedown process. That's actually something that we're really focused on at Perth.org. People should have access to fast and easy reporting channels. It should be transparent how these reports are evaluated. It more or less shouldn't go into a black hole, which is sort of how it feels right now for people. We could see policymakers pushing regulation and liability, which would be really helpful, especially if they were to devise rules that hold platforms and tool providers to safety standards, while still protecting legitimate uses. And then lastly, industry standards, so shared databases of revoked deepfake fingerprints, model embedding watermarks, and cross-platform reporting APIs. NCMEC, StopNCII.org, and GiveCT are good examples of issue-specific cross-platform collaborations for signal sharing on child safety, image-based abuse, and counterterrorism efforts. And then, of course, at Perth.org, we're working to advance a universal reporting system that would introduce efficiencies that are fundamental improvements, not just for platforms and shareholders, but also users. I think that's it for me. And happy to answer any questions that came from the presentation. I'm going to hand it over to Jamie.
Thanks a lot. Thank you all for being here, and thank you both for digging in a little bit deeper. But I think when we got invited to put this together, what we wanted to do was create a space, again, that we're here to also learn from the folks who are here today. And so obviously, Fathom is really looking at that solution-based side of things, or what are the different solutions that we can actually find, build, and scale. And then we had the opportunity to hear from Sherry today in terms of an organization like Perth that's really digging into looking at impact and what that looks like. So we definitely, we are equipped and have questions and content that we can ask you all, but we didn't want to fill that up without kind of opening it up to the audience today. And in the true vibe of MozFest is to have a conversation about this. And so would be curious, as we've hit on the governance issues, we've talked a little bit about some of the data and the polling and whatnot, and you've heard about an organization that's kind of getting into the action phase of this. Questions, comments, what are your thoughts today, or how are you all thinking about this? And would love to put it back out to the audience for some reaction at 9:35 in the morning in Barcelona. Jump in. Yeah, there we go. And when you speak, if you could just let us know where you're from and just a little bit of context so we have it, that'd be great.
Never mind. Can you hear me?
Yeah, you got it.
Okay, so I am Francesco, originally from Italy, currently in Brussels. I coordinate the civic artificial intelligence campaign on behalf of humans, a kind of movement for popular initiative. I was really interested by your presentation because I do believe you raised two very crucial points, and I would like you to elaborate a bit more on that. First of all, the fact that people trust more independent experts. Would you like to elaborate more on what an independent expert is? Is an independent expert from a civil society organization the same as an independent expert as a freelance serving for other bigger organizations, or I don't know, I mean, what kind of expert are we thinking of? And the second point is, I really appreciate that regardless of all the risks outlined at the very beginning of the presentation, that you try to have also a propositive approach. I was wondering, what do you think would be the use of AI to empower citizens in democracy, like to empower their choices, their popular participation, their democratic engagement with politics?
Great. That's a two-pronged question. I'm going to just kind of respond to the first part of it. I took us back to some of those slides, and I know that folks were just coming in, but we kind of got into this whole thing around when Fathom was early on, which early on was 18 months ago, started doing this polling and focus grouping. We started kind of looking at what the trust issues were. And I think your first question is just your first one was around which constituencies felt that way, or can you just start with the first one again?
I think it was who should be the independent experts,
Yeah.
Is that right?
Great. I'm going to let Lucia really talk about kind of how we're looking at that. And keep in mind, as we're developing this, this is a work in progress. As we look at this solution in particular, it's one of those pieces where we're learning as we go along in terms of who those independent experts should look like. But I'm going to let Lucia talk about kind of how we're thinking about it right now.
Yes, so that's an excellent question and definitely gives us a lot to think about. So when we formulated the question for the polling, it was phrased as third-party subject matter experts. So the idea would be someone that doesn't work for the government or for a tech company. So they could be any of the people you've mentioned, like either a freelance human rights consultant or someone that's very good at red teaming on the technical side of AI. So the idea would be that, and also the idea of IVOs would be that they certify for different aspects of AI safety and accountability. That could be both on the technical side as well as on the policy side, like, I don't know, is this AI model created with like energy efficiency, et cetera? Like, that is something that the marketplace would dictate, so depending on what demands exist. So it would depend if like companies see that in order to increase public trust in their products, they really need a certification more on like data privacy or like child safety, et cetera. So it would really depend on like what risks are being prioritized by the public.
And then go back to the first, then the other piece was around the positive piece. I want to make sure we answer both your questions. This is what happens when you're on stage and you get a multi-pronged question. What was the second part of it?
The second part was among the positives, how can I say, the positive uses of AI to empower people. Do you have anything in mind when it comes to democracy, and especially democratic engagement and democratic participation? Like, how would you see some of your solutions apply also to that field? Yeah,
it's a great question. And I think as we're going through this, as we're trying to figure this out, and it's complicated, we're all kind of in that we're kind of muddling through and trying to figure out what all these things look like. I think when you start looking at even the way that the design of the independent verification organization that we're creating, it's got to be informed by the public. And it gets into that whole piece of if we're not listening to what society wants, then we're not going to create something that embraces that. And that's why we did look, as we heard from folks, we heard both the positives and the negatives, that there's a lot of, people are excited about it, but with caution. And I think that the more you can engage public discourse, do what we're doing right now, do what we're doing in the field to really make sure that there's genuine public input. And even when we start designing these independent verification organizations, I think how you design them and how you bring people to the table will define whether or not you hit that sweet spot around the democracy issue. Yeah, go, please.
That's a really great question. One thing that we think about a lot is the fact that online violence chills speech. So how many of you here have directly experienced some form of online violence? Cyberbullying, harassment, threats, doxing, hacking, impersonation, anything? How many of you have seen somebody else experience doxing, harassment, hate? That's the problem. It doesn't matter whether you directly have experienced it or if you've seen somebody else, chances are it's something that's in the back of your mind and it chills people's participation. And we can't have that. That's simply unacceptable. So just as AI can be leveraged to, translate threats into multiple languages to be able to scale it or to automate bots and, the various ways that it can be sped up, we can also use it for content moderation purposes. Right now, the platforms are building in AI as a means of content moderation. It's just not, it's not where we need it to be. And civil society can and should be more involved in that. And so that's a big part of what we're trying to do at Perth, and we're hoping to build more consortiums to be able to address that more fully.
Thank you for bravely asking the first question. What other questions or reflections do people have today? Yeah, no, go ahead. We had the awkward question silence.
Hi, I'm Sophia. I'm from the US and I work at an organization called Gen Z for Change. What we've been seeing a lot with folks that are in the content sphere especially is a large concern as it relates to age-related verification laws that are currently popping up in the states that have the potential to be leveraged against, like, say, queer youth in specific states where they have a hostile AG that may be able to use the legislation to do something negative. And so I'm wondering how we're able to reconcile the necessary, like, privacy and security element of these platforms, them being like a very important space for people to be able to organize on, at the same time as the necessity for safety, especially for young people online.
Sure, you want to, yeah, go for it. That seems very well suited to you.
It's challenging, and we don't have an answer quite yet. But again, I think it goes back to civil society playing a bigger role here. I think, to Fathom's point and to their research, people trust civil society more. They don't necessarily trust the companies to regulate themselves, and government is not exactly at an all-time high in terms of trust either. But this will need to be something that government and civil society partner on because of the nature of age verification and the data that's being shared.
I think, sorry, I'm going to add something. I think it's interesting that you talked about the state AGs, because that's a lot of what Fathom does. Our work is working on a licensure program, independent verification organizations. And so ideally, the board would be looking at those issues, right? So making sure that age verification is not being weaponized against queer youth. So I think it's a really important point I hadn't thought about.
What other questions do folks have in terms of the governance or some of the work that Sherry's doing at her?
Oh,
yeah,
great.
Go ahead, right over here.
I have to scoot by you, sorry.
Hi, good morning. I'm Hugh. I'm on the Mozilla Corporation board. I'm based in California. So you talked about some of the dangers, accelerated dangers because of AI. I was just wondering, is anybody working on AI tools that can combat that? For example, recognizing a deep fake, and is that being incorporated into all this work you're doing?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to defer to Sherry on this, and I think as we're building this, we want to create the space to be able to kind of figure some of those things out, and I think Sherry can kind of speak to how the industry is responding to it.
Yes. There are lots of both private companies and civil society organizations that are trying to harness the power of AI, both for content moderation and for AI for good, of course. The problem is that AI can be leveraged to evade detection. Like, the moderation can only go so far, and bad actors tend to be a step ahead. So that's something that we're still trying to figure out, I think, as a society. And I don't think that AI alone is going to be able to solve that problem for us. It's going to have to be that multi-pronged approach. We also need to practice better digital hygiene. We also, like, as a people, we need better education out there. We need new norms that we all agree on somehow, and that's not an easy task. But they are all doable. So in terms of specifics, I'm happy to get into that more offline.
Lucy, do you want to talk a little bit about how the IVO is kind of structured to respond to some of those things?
To respond to
his question in terms of the rest.
Yeah. So I think really could you repeat the question so I can?
I think it was how we respond to deepfakes. How would the IVO interact with a deepfake issue, or in general? Sorry.
Just in general, using AI to mitigate these dangers. So yes, AI for good in this space.
Yeah. So I think something that would be very important in this case is to not put the cart before the horse. So how can you use AI to combat something that AI is fueling? And that would be having the right safeguards in place. So basically, if you have a certification that says, like, okay, this, like, AI tool, this AI model that is designed to, like, protect children or, like, prevent deepfakes, prevent online harms, actually has passed, like, comprehensive tests. And also hasn't just passed these comprehensive tests to make sure that it's not going to put you in more danger, but also as the technologies advance, these IVOs would be able to update their standards and make sure that these tools that are meant to do good actually do the good that they're saying that they can do. Yeah, and they can deliver on their promises.
And to build on Lucia's point, so yes to organizations harnessing AI for good, but also yes to guardrails. At the end of the day, there are going to be more and more of these apps the notification apps and the face swap apps and things like that. There need to be guardrails around those. There needs to be better guardrails around like private information that is able to be gleaned by AI and combined. Like there are lots of things that we can be doing to prevent these threats and harms, not just, trying to use our different forces like a Luke Skywalker versus whatever the Star Wars thing is. But we can't constantly be trying to fight good and bad. We can also just have good.
And if I can build on that and take off my Fathom hat and put on my Columbia hat, so there's a big drive to use AI for social science research, but having worked in public trust in technology, you first need to make sure that the AI you're using doesn't then add more layers of complexity, and then you can't use AI to research how people interact with AI. At some point, you need some guardrails or some framework to make sure that we're actually making progress.
Hi, I'm Tim Davies from Connected by Data, working on the voice of communities in governing data and AI, and I wanted to maybe introduce two themes. The first is noticing the pollings amongst voters and engagement with voters, but also many of these points around children and young people's experience in education and online safety, and just a question about what data and evidence do we have about the attitudes of children and young people themselves to these technologies. We're currently doing some work with the Department for Education in the UK on generative AI in schools and trying to get to student views. And so I'm just curious across your work what you've seen of those young people's views. The other theme is around how we go from understanding public attitudes to getting publics feeling capable to act on those. Because of those issues on the screen right now, it's perhaps only the top one whichever really tips over into mobilizing a political constituency to act on it. Many of the others are issues that people care about when asked, but often don't translate into kind of mobilization and from participation into power. And I'm curious how you think about taking what we understand of demand for guardrails into the kinds of political power that will secure them.
Yeah, I'll start. I'll let Lucia get more into the details around, especially the youth perspectives. But I think, on the polling, the team that did the polling, I think to get us started, we really wanted to make sure that we cast a wide swath. So it was academics, it was electeds, it was private sector, it was nonprofits. I think, we're so early on right now, and this data, with any good research and any good new solution, then it will prompt you to figure out what are the other areas where you need to dig deeper, and that youth perspective, I think, is going to be one of them. Both when we're looking at the data that I'm presenting today is mostly US-based, but it's also looking at, well, how does this translate outside of the United States? What does this look like in other countries who are starting to ask the governance issues and understand those? And so I think that there's a need to dig deeper in that area, and I think we'll keep learning as we grow. I think on the other point, and I want to make sure I get this right for you in terms of the question you're asking, but I also think that we presented about 2 weeks ago at the Southwest Philanthropy Conference in Colorado Springs. There's about 300 foundations represented there. And it was my big takeaway in watching the conversation is there's times, and I think a lot of us are so in the weeds around AI or working in this space right now. I was amazed at how many people, when we presented that data, that was surprising to them, or they had never even heard or thought about it that way. And so some of the data that we're presenting to this group today, there's probably not a lot that's shocking or surprising to you all. With the folks who are starting to get in that space, I was amazed at how many of them are like, oh, I didn't even think about that, I didn't even know that, I had not thought about a governance model or even what that could look like. And so a lot of it right now is trying to figure out, well, how do we have these conversations to start educating folks about why this is important? And how do we actually start digging into, as we're building all of these, as all of this technology starts to integrate itself into our world, how are we responding to that, and how are we building that, and how are we educating people about why that's important and having the dialogues that we're having today? And so Lucy, I don't know if you want to add to that or not in terms of just the data and the polling that we collected, or?
Yeah, sure. So thank you for bringing that up. That is very interesting because so far our polling has focused more on like generally the state of AI in the US, so people's attitudes. We did find this year, as opposed to last year, that the concerns around like education are increasing. So our plan is to do further polling into education, but is it like from the perspective of parents or teachers? Is it negative? What are some of the positive attitudes? So definitely understanding also the youth's perspective on that. And I'd love to hear more about the work you're doing with DFE in the UK. So yeah, thanks for bringing that up.
Sherry, did you want to add anything, or?
The only thing I can add to that is 50% of children across Europe, aged 10 to 18, have experienced cyberbullying at least once. So I'm really glad that there are people out there who are doing this work that's really necessary.
Thank you for the question. Do I have time for a couple more? Any other comments or questions? Yeah, please, jump in. People are warmed up now. It's a little bit easier to get a question out of you than it was 15 minutes ago.
Hi. So my question is, what would you say are the three more important things a company or organization should, that work remotely should do to prevent fakes using AI?
That seems like a perfect conversation for you, Sherry.
Yeah, this goes back to the data privacy and cyber hygiene. The top three things that we recommend for people are, one, to try to get your personal information removed from the internet as much as humanly possible. So thinking about everything from your address to email accounts, email addresses, phone numbers, photos, being really careful about what you put out there on the interwebs, I think is first and foremost at the individual level, and then also being really mindful at the organization. How are you putting out bios? How are you putting out headshots? One of the things that we see with journalists, for example, the image-based abuse that journalists face, not sure where that came from, it tends to be headshots that are doctored in some way that is then, you know, it could be like their head cut off or something awful. And that's, again, AI enabled, it's not just Photoshop. And we're seeing more and more organizations using avatars. If that's something that's of concern, you know, there are definitely other ways that you can actually use AI to make avatars or cartoons out of headshots. Beyond that, if you think that your organization is at risk, if you're working in a sensitive industry, the organization could and should cover the cost for you to have something like Delete Me, to actually have data brokers scrub your data. Or you could have something like Canary or Opus or Epic. There are lots of services out there that you can hire to take care of that for you. And then the other thing is security. You need to make sure that all of your accounts, you know, if you're not using a password manager, at the very least, all your passwords are different. You've got multi-factor authentication set up. SMS is not enough. We always recommend an authenticator app. And then beyond that, yeah, just good security practices for yourself. This is something that we give like lots of recommendations around, and it does depend on each person and their specific situation, where they live, their sector. So happy to get into that separate or offline if you'd like.
Lucy, did you want to add anything on the private sector side of things, or are we?
I think we
good?
can, yeah.
Great. Other questions? We have about 7 minutes left. What other comments or thoughts do folks have? Did you want to, I know that you had a question that you're going to pose to the group, Lucia. Do you want me to open that up for you as we're kind of at the tail end of this?
Yeah, sure.
Go for it.
Should it be the question? I mean, something that I wanted to talk about as well is that what comes up in conversation about IVOs, so certification, the idea of like certifying, adding like a seal of approval to AI systems to certify that they're safe. It's like comparisons with like other industries or like other methods. For example, I have people working in the sustainability industry that say like, oh, but I'm a small organization. I could get certified for a lot of things, but we just don't have the resources. So does that mean that only like OpenAI will get all these certificates and smaller like startups won't? And I think part of them, that's something that we're definitely thinking about and working on. So it's like, how could this, would the model have to be to give everyone access to, becoming certified? And also, what is the difference between that and, for example, like B Corp or some of the other certifications that exist, I don't know, like Dolphin Free Tuna, etc. And I guess the difference is that those are like certifications based on voluntary commitments, whereas in this case, the outcomes that the IVOs would be certifying for would be like legally backed because they'd be set by the government. So I guess it would just have slightly more like legal weight, which means that also would give the companies more of a competitive advantage and an incentive to pursue it. So it is something like similar to B Corp, but I guess with that legal or like that enhanced kind of like importance.
I think it gets in a little bit around especially the private sector and the company side of things, and the effort that we're trying to make to really understand this issue across sectors, looking at it from the public sector, the private sector, the nonprofit sector side. And so thank you for that. Other comments before we kind of move to kind of a wrap up of today? Does anybody have any other last minute questions around the governance side or some of the work that Sherry's doing? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I just had a question on the governance side of things. I think that because if there's a very obvious concern of like democratic backsliding on a global scale, and it's very difficult to have the same level of regulation when there is like widespread attacks on civil society and the government and corporations essentially just like being in bed with each other. I wonder how we work towards these benchmarks and these guardrails on that governmental level when the government may be hostile in that territory.
Do you want me to take it? Yeah. Sure. So that is actually something that we're working on. Right now, the data around online violence and online threats and harm generally, basically all the data of anything happening online is kept by the platforms, and it's siloed. It doesn't need to be that way. So a big part of what we're doing is trying to create that data set so that we can actually shine a light on what's happening out there, so that it's not just anecdotes and it's not just stories, but we actually have concrete stats to be able to go to the platforms with and say, we know that the majority of death threats are sent via DM. You need to do a better job in the way that you create the choice architecture and the design and the facilitation. Like that new accounts, for example, shouldn't be able to just DM anybody that they want. On Instagram, the default setting for anybody, whether you have a private account or a public account, is that anybody can send you a DM request. It doesn't matter if you're private or public. That's not okay. On Twitter, they actually have a better choice architecture where your DMs are closed unless you actively open them. Why does there need to be a difference there? Why can't industry be learning from one another? We can push them for that. We can leverage data to be able to actually create that change. And organizations like civil society democracy defense organizations and civic tech organizations and research institutes and others, I think anybody who's affected right now has a role to play. And coming together, I think, is our best bet because the others are quite powerful and they have a lot of, there's a lot of power on their side, but we have power of numbers. So yeah. I don't lose hope here.
I think your question also gets at the heart of one of the reasons that we're here right now is we're trying to figure that out. This is super complicated, and especially when you get into the governance issues and when people want guardrails, what does that mean? And so we're trying to find places to start. We Fathom started with some legislation in California, and we're starting to have those dialogues and kind of figuring out, well, what does a governance structure look like given the current climate, and how do you create something that's relatively hard to create? If we knew how to do it, it would have been done before, and it gets more and more complicated because one state in the United States, one state, and all of them are different. And then if you move outside of the United States and you start looking at this issue globally around governance, it's complicated. And so where do you start? And our hope is that we're prompting some conversations, not just we're really digging in, and I think that Lucia got into, here's an example of where we're actually building something that's tangible, that we're trying it out. But I think if we give this talk in 3 months, this deck would look very different. And if we do the polling and start digging into some of the findings that we're learning as we go along, that polling is going to continue to look different because we're going to keep learning as we go. And so our hope is that we'll continue this conversation throughout the festival. You know, I'm going to give you, Sherry, do you want to, just for a quick wrap up and reflection for Dave, final comments for this group before they leave?
Sure. So the one thing that everybody here in this room can do to be part of the solution or getting to a solution, you can go to perth.org and request an account. And when in the How Did You Hear About Us box, if you put MozFest25, that'll automatically get you an account. You won't have to go through the extra verification process. And just by having an account, you'll immediately get a set of preventative and protection resources and action steps that you can take. So to the question earlier around what can people do. And then ultimately, when you use perth.org to report something that's happening, you're not just getting support and resources, you're also contributing to the solution. So we need as much of that as possible.
All right, Lucia, final comments?
Yes, I would say that, of course, there is democratic backsliding. As we've seen in our data, there's lack of trust in traditional institutions. But really, that is a window of opportunity to capitalize on that like bipartisan consensus that, at least with AI, we need guardrails, we need new approaches. So I'm very excited to be here at MozFest and find out what should some of those governance approaches look like in the US, in Europe, elsewhere where you do work. So really, of course, yeah, I think I like to see this moment as like really a pivotal window of opportunity.
Great. 1,000 thank yous all for starting your morning off with us on a lively conversation about governance in Barcelona. Super excited to be here, and so we're excited to be here this early because we hope that we'll be able to encounter folks and have these conversations throughout the festival. So 1,000 thanks to you, and a big thank you to Mozilla for creating a space for us to be able to have these conversations. I think they're really important, and I think we're going to keep learning as we go along. So have a great, awesome Friday morning here at MozFest, and thanks for being here.